So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're 5 minutes in, so let's begin. This is the 10th and final equity talk in the series that we started back in March. My name is Neha Kumar. I'm currently president, was VP at large when we had our last equity talk. And I just wanted to mention quickly that the reason that we started doing this project with a lot of people, many of whom are here, back in March was really to ensure that we had looked into deeply issues around equity and Sikkai and different dimensions of equity and Sikkai. And some of the talks that we planned, we had come up with, others were requested, and we sort of made them up as we went along. And so you can see all of the reports that we've done for the last 9, and so this is the 10th one. And for this one, I want to really extend a very deep gratitude and appreciation for Finda, for the team of organizers along with her, so Adriana, Angela, Marisol, Bryan, and Kale. I hope I'm not missing someone. They've put a lot of time into planning this set of conversations that we have, that we're going to have here today. So thank you everyone for joining. And without further wait, I will ask Finda to take over.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Ihudiya Finda Williams. I'm here with our other lovely moderators, and so we thought we would introduce ourselves. So again, my name is Ihudiya Finda Williams, but I go by Finda. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan School of Information, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. My research focuses on partnering with formerly incarcerated individuals as we design tools and resources for job search, but through learning digital literacy. Broadly, I'm interested in low-income African Americans and their experiences with technology. And so I will popcorn it over to Adriana.
Hi everyone, my name is Adriana Alvarado and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella in Spanish. And I am a PhD candidate at Georgia Tech. And my research focus on designing situated tools to mobilize social media data from their platforms of origin to the institutional context of NGOs. And I'll pass it over to Marisol.
Good morning, good afternoon, I guess, yeah, to everybody. Marisol Wong-Villacres, pronouns she, her, sorry for the noise. I'm associate faculty at the Escuela Superior Politécnica del Litoral in Ecuador. I'm also a member of the Sikkai Latin America Committee. My research explores cultural, learning, and participatory approaches to co-design with groups that have historically been pushed to the margins of society, such as immigrant families. And with that, I will pass it on to Angela.
Thank you so much for that. Hi, everyone. My name is Angela Smith. I've recently completed my PhD at Northwestern University and will be starting faculty at University of Texas at Austin, School of Information. And in terms of my research takes a look at race and equity, but also in regards to how we can better support information work among low SES populations, specifically homeless youth. And with that, I will popcorn it over to Bryan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bryan Dosono, and I use he, him, his pronouns. I received my PhD at Syracuse University, and I enter this space as a design researcher currently located in New York City. I'm broadly interested in researching inclusivity and belonging in online communities. And with that, I'll popcorn it over to Kale.
Hey, I'm Kale Passmore, they, them, he, him, an HCI researcher on discrimination, coping, and play. I'm currently on a rainy Treaty 6 land in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, which is unceded homeland to the Métis and over 60 First Nations peoples, from the Soto to the Plains and Woods Cree, Dene, Nakota. We've got a tiny bit of time and a lot to cover. So as quickly as possible, I just want to recognize that many from this organizing committee benefit from the privileges of ongoing settler colonialism, and others in this group are directly subject to those oppressions. The very devices actually that we're on are built from resources extracted from indigenous lands, often through great violence to the land and to its peoples. So I want to cover our sort of mini positionality in a general way and the limitations of the organizing group here. So the organizing voices for this talk cover a small range of experiences across marginalized intersections of race, culture, ability, class, age, gender, maternalism, and rural-urban divides. However, we do remain a relatively elite social group by merit of being established scholars given an SIGCHI platform and being received by all of you. Numerous voices are missing, both from the organizing group and in attendance today. So identifying those voices and barriers to their attendance is part of today's goal. Greater representation from the global South, indigenous folks worldwide, non-English speakers, and folks excluded from academia are the very voices we continue to advocate for. From macro considerations of epistemological and cultural exclusion, to micro considerations of which languages and cultures are centered, whose comfort in which language and whose values are received. The experiences shared, even the time at which we're hosting isn't comprehensive or totally inclusive. And this is to say nothing of those long disenfranchised or whose material constraints make their presence impossible. We're working against those exclusionary norms here, against overrepresentation from US-centric institutions and cultures, but inevitably we're gonna fall short. We haven't succeeded, but we are pushing toward inclusion through how we shift present norms and set future norms. So let's talk about norms. As an internationally diverse group of humans, we ask that you just be patient, be kind, be supportive, and show sensitivity to anyone who has the floor by staying aware of how much time and space you take up. Not everyone has the privilege of access to the communities of knowledge that you may. Norms vary by culture. Respect for one another and good faith in each other is what unifies us in our unequal processes, or it divides us. As the talk proceeds, we ask that you keep in mind, we're going to prioritize expressions from those who are socially or culturally marginalized over those in greater positions of power, especially if those persons are requesting education. That marks this as a space for requesting vulnerability and risking harm. Criticality in this space is crucial, but personal experiences are not to be questioned. So the first hour of this session is recorded. The preceding half hour will be to provide some off-the-record space to share your insights. We're going to ask that you raise your hand and we'll unmute you accordingly. For this purpose, we encourage but don't require that you add your pronouns to your Zoom name. And when you begin speaking, please state your name, affiliation, and pronouns. By default, you'll be muted. If you want to speak, just raise your hand, we'll call on you. And with an aim toward language justice and accessible spaces, we encourage you to communicate in the language you're most comfortable. And you're more than welcome to ask for help with translation should you wish. In chat, shortly you'll see a link posted to the Slido for a anonymous question posting and upvoting. We're maintaining a Discord, that link will also be posted, for ongoing asynchronous discussion. Just holler at the organizers if additional services or aid is needed. The recorded portion of this talk will be posted with additional accessibility and translation features, as well as a summary blog post afterward. When finished speaking, please mute your mic. If you do need to describe or talk about sensitive topics or traumas, please provide a content warning. And in the event of harassment, discrimination, or additional needs, just message one of the organizers here, one of the attending SIGCHI Cares members, or sigchiec@acm.org. And with that, I will turn it back over to Finda. Or sorry, is it Marisol that we've got next? There we go.
Yes, sorry, I was taking taking time. So after that very thorough introduction, we'd like to go over the aspects of the meeting today. And so what we prepare, we'd like for this to be a collaborative discussion. And so we've prepared for the first part of the talk to be more of a conversation about the potential challenges and issues that we find in terms of race, ethnicity, and culture. And then for the next half of the discussion, we will exchange ideas about possible pathways moving forward, including policy recommendations. And I think that will take us now to Bryan and Finda, who will walk us through everything else.
All right, thank you, Marisol. So Bryan and I worked together to review various community statements, Medium articles, prior to this talk, in order to recognize that these conversations are not new, that they are happening, and that it's important for us to acknowledge them before we deep dive and jump into this conversation in of itself. And also to make sure that this conversation, being that it is recorded, and our hopes is that Sikkai will use it, that it'll be fruitful and productive in the creation of developing policies going forward to support race and ethnicity and culture. So I'll be reading the first half, and then Bryan will be reading the second half. Again, this is what we've known and this is how we synthesize it, again, acknowledging that there might be a limitation of how we have, and we do welcome any additional references or link as we continue to build upon this. So the first one is bold action: condemn racism, sexism, ableism across the membership and beyond. Funding: ensure funding supports individuals by regions, especially emphasizing the support of marginalized communities. Representation: diversify leadership, committees, and subject matter experts to prioritize representation across many dimensions. Transparency: publish annual reports for each special interest group about demographics of participation in their sponsored events and allocation of funds. Visibility: highlight emerging work around the world through intentional outreach in connection with press, being cognizant of race and ethnic diversity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Finda. I'll now go over the second half of what we've been able to synthesize through a variety of statements. Again, you can find these statements in the collaborative notes document that Adriana has posted in our chat. We've seen recurring themes that center around training. So making sure that we reserve time within dedicated sessions and activities at conferences and workshops focus on combating different forms of bias and discrimination. There are also themes around service, advocating for fair and just distribution of workloads or tasks related to diversity, equity, and inclusion to all staff members. There were also themes around local investment, committing to donating or servicing a marginalized community based on conference location. There were also themes on infrastructure, iterating toward building a robust ACM digital library with improved search functionality by population and translated texts, as well as a focus on growth, seeking out diverse institutions to broaden participation in computing and enable the creation of diverse ACM chapters. I'll now hand it back over to Finda.
Awesome. So we encourage you all to join in our collaborative notes. In addition to using your voice or the collaborative notes or Slido in order to engage in this discussion. So now we would like to welcome the participation of the audience while we discuss our first topic at hand. What are the pressing problems or issues that people see as it relates to race in Sikkai? In order to situate everyone, we will wait 1 minute to either you to review the collaborative notes or to think about your thoughts. And then at that point, we will, if you are interested in speaking, since everyone is muting, please raise your hand and we'll call at you one at a time, or you can use the collaborative notes or the Slido. Kel will be supporting to help to moderate this portion of the discussion. So yeah, I'll wait 1 minute. So we'll start in 1 minute. All right, so this is again Ihudiya Finda Williams. As a reminder to please state your name when you are speaking, and so we will open the floor up to you all.
Yeah, and if there's anyone actually like to prioritize any BIPOC attendees that to start us off with any questions out loud, that would be fantastic. If not, we can actually turn to the collaborative notes.
Okay.
Deborah has raised her hand. Sorry.
Perfect. Deborah, would you like to start us off here?
Sorry, what's the question? Okay, I raised my hand and
Yeah.
I want to say something, but I'm not sure what you asked.
We're currently focused on the question of what are the pressing problems or issues that people see as it relates to race and Sikkai.
Yes. So I took a look at these points and I didn't write anything yet, but I would like to bring the question of where racism come from. I think it's missing the recognition of, I like to understand the past so we can try to think about the path we are going. So I just think that race is very connected to colonization. And if we've been talking a lot about decolonial thinking, or some people use the word decolonization. I don't like so much, but I understand the meaning. I think is very connected to race because it was through colonization that race was, and also what type of knowledge that was undervalued. And I think it's missing also I'm going to add there, but I just bringing a topic here, but I will add like other ways of knowledge, because most time, I'm not so sure, but I'd like to take a look in the Kai papers, but papers, when they talk about rituals or healing process, spirituality is always a myth or folklore or something that is not recognized as knowledge. And I think like maybe looking for indigenous and the research is a ceremony, the book I think would be also nice to see other ways of other methods and methodologies. I think is something that we can adapt to ourselves instead of following methodologies very specific and organized by Western people. Yeah. So instead of decolonization, I would say de-Westernization or the Eurocentric, I don't know. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Deborah, for this feedback. I'm also going to jump into the collaborative notes. We've got a lot of participants putting in information. I also wanted to mention, because we split the talk in 2 parts, to if you could limit your statements to a minute so that we can make sure that we get to everyone. So far what I've seen is, and I'm just reading the items that are in yellow. In terms of challenges also mentioned were awards. So awards and recognition. We also have work to do revealing the contributions of marginalized people who have been erased from the history of our field, shine spotlights on pioneers of color. We also have failure to consider consequences of work and have systems in place to enforce this. Framing of race categories is frequently American or Western. There's a lack of shared understanding across Sikkai of racial inequities and systemic barriers. Epistemic violence. who is asked and required to do the labor of educating for others, which is related to the above statement. Translations of work in different languages, valuing references and work written in different languages, paywalls, little agreement as to what role does race should play within HTI, and then privileged communities are overrepresented as research participants. Their perspectives are highlighted in our findings. And then I see another one that was highlighted, representation at the highest echelons of ACM, for example, fellows. We can do work to have mirrors there for underrepresented up and coming scholars to identify with and how they too can ascend to such spaces in their career. So that one I would actually put in the recommendation. But overall, just reviewing a lot of what is being seen, I see that is also marrying some of the what we know, which is excellent. In addition, we'll definitely, these notes will definitely, we'll be writing a Medium article about this session too. Does anyone else wanted to participate by verbally saying something? Again, it's based on your area of comfort. If there's comments via Slido, we also appreciate that too. Not all at once. And I guess as we are having this discussion, as you are thinking of challenges, the next portion is recommendations to Sikkai in terms of how to go about implementing some of these pressing concerns and challenges that we have. Ideally, it would be great to provide concrete steps, even though this is not a sum-all game, to help Sikkai move towards more racial and ethnic equity across its organization. Oops, sorry.
I'm loving how comprehensive this collaborative document is quickly becoming. I'm starting to think this is something we should do or have, like, should have done for all of the equity talks.
So yeah, we invite Amon, please pronounce your name to the stage.
Hi, I'm Amon Milner in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm from the Olin College of Engineering. It's good to be with everyone. Because we did invite verbal comments, I just wanted to underscore some of the sentiments that have been expressed in writing and some of the things that we've been hearing in terms of the important work and who the work falls on doing. How do we protect the people that do the work when doing a good job of introducing these concepts? If we had wild success and instead of having these conversations internally within these groups, if they became commonplace in all ACM meetings as one of the starts to, situating the meetings that are not concentrated on this topic, then that will be a success. But the people that bring such attention and care and work to those spaces would then be rewarded by having to do more of it at their institutions while still holding all of the other responsibilities that they have. And that's one of the difficulties, where if we're successful, we're rewarded with more work. And how do we have strategies for setting that in place, but bringing in allies and accomplices to share the burden and not have it be one of the things that define like your success is related to doing this work and all of the other work at the highest levels in order to ascend within SIGCHI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a little bit exhausting, especially when we've heard from other talks, you know, there can be repetition of the same errors in like 2-3 years, so that labor ends up feeling like it's wasted or lost at times. Creating like legacy and mentorship systems seems really essential to me, at least.
Thank you, Iman and Carol. And so I'll also go back to the collaborative notes. And then if anyone has any reflections to highlight what's being said, we also welcome that. So what we have is recognition of where racism comes from and connect that to colonialization, other ways of knowing and other ways of doing research. It can be very scary to talk about race, especially for trainees. I see that person's still rap writing, so I'll move on to the next one. This one, I think I mentioned earlier, privileged communities are overrepresented as research participants. Their perspectives are highlighted in our findings. It can be difficult to distinguish global and race equity, but they are distinct and overlapping. And then how do we protect the individuals who do the work internally, the people who bring care and concern to this work in these spaces, are rewarded with more work, mental and emotional labor, which Aman just highlighted. And yeah, and the one that I did miss was it can be very scary to talk about race, especially for trainees, and they have in parentheses graduate students. Does anyone want to further expand on what's listed here? Sure, I will, and then if you could pronounce your name, Vinova, sorry. I like to try, yeah. Go if you
I'm Vinoba Vinagamuthi. I'm based in London, pronounced she, her. I work for the BBC. I agree with the sentiment that talking about race can be scary. I suppose in my British way, it would be awkward. It's always an awkward conversation. It's so easy nowadays, for instance, to say, hey, I expect 50-50 female-male ratio for gender. It's easier to talk about targets and measurement of successes and things like that when it comes to things like gender. It's acceptable, for instance, to talk about it. A white male could sit down there and say, hey, you need to do 50-50, and that's just the standard we expect. But when it comes to race, I feel like a lot of allies, for instance, also find it difficult to kind of say, what we are aiming for, what success looks like. And if you don't have lived experiences talking about race, talking about, what it is like to be Asian or Black or, Indian, it's all very tough and uncomfortable and awkward. And maybe we need to do some work to try and see how to normalize those conversations, because I think a lot of this backward sort of rollback of work that we've progressed is because someone new comes in and they just don't know what to make of it either.
Thank you, Vinova. And so before I go to the next person, for this particular segment, we have about 5 minutes left, and then we'll switch over to the next segment. But I also wanted to remind people that we have an off the record portion of this discussion. So if you don't want to be recorded or highlighted, but you do have a viewpoint that you would like to express, you can also wait to the end of this session. So on that note, I will move on to Tawana. Oh, okay, never mind. All right, then I'll move on to Stacy.
Hi, this is Stacy Branham. I am a white, queer, disabled American woman. I'm also the accessibility an adjunct chair for accessibility for Sikkai. But I just wanted to highlight that Sikkai operates within many and alongside many other institutional structures that themselves have racial systemic inequities. And the fact that there are no Black women in my department, for example, is very problematic. And I am excited to think about ways that SIGCHI can be more aware of those external, like the ecosystem we're in, and try to reach out and also provide supports that can adjust those problems. Because if we just think of ourselves as insular and not having anything to do with that other problem, then I think our fields cannot truly make progress.
Thank you, Stacy. So I'm also going to turn back quickly to the collaborative notes to highlight other things that people have stated. And I'm just going to review the highlighted items. So if there's anything that also wasn't stated earlier, I can state it. So the first one is, it's challenging to bring nuanced conversations about race topics into workplace discussions when keywords such as critical race theory are weaponized and introduce backlash that can set the intended work backwards. Another comment was, other ways of knowing and other ways of doing research, not as myth or folklore. Academics have done research in every corner of the planet. It is time for the object to become a researcher and supported. It is time for the object to become a researcher and supported by Western academics like us. I hope I read that clearly. If someone wants to clarify that one, please let me know. And then this one is, I think, and this one's in relation to it being scary to talk about race. I think for everyone speaking as a minority or as a WEIRD or whatever, it is very easy to say the wrong thing and challenging to challenge people. And there is another comment that is being written, and I'll just go ahead and it looks like it's done. To build further, being able to communicate lived experiences can also be triggering, traumatizing, etc. It is very nuanced, both to empathize as well as explain. All right, so that was our 5 minutes in terms of talking about challenges. And so I will move the mic, or I will hand the mic to Bryan to talk about part 2 of our discussion. And Kel will also be helping us moderate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Finda. All right, everyone. So for part 2, we have time allocated for this question, which is, what are recommendations for policy changes as it relates to race and Sikkai? We have about 17 minutes allocated for this part of the conversation. And again, there is an off-the-record component to this equity talk later on in this meeting. Please join us if you haven't already, if you're just tuning in, into the collaborative meeting notes document. For those who are only joining us via phone, I'll quickly read out loud some questions to consider as a springboard for this discussion, while I give everyone a minute to process their thoughts either in the collaborative notes doc or as they prepare to speak verbally. So just some questions to consider. How can Sikkai proactively support racially and ethnically marginalized communities? How can Sikkai develop leadership pipelines? How can the community distribute awards equitably? What are recommendations of ways for Sikkai to identify more diverse candidates outside of networks without overburdening individuals, etc.? Open calls. Do the positions for which there are open calls make their work visible? Is there enough training or opportunities to train before open calls are disseminated so that people can know what they're signing up for? Is there trust that the open calls will really be open, for which there needs to be transparency beforehand? How should Sikkai think about policies against discrimination, bias, and racism? Aside from interactions, which is the magazine and blog, Sikkai's medium, what channels could be used for diverse visibility? And how can Sikkai diversify its language that people feeling that their language is not represented or included? With that, I will now open the floor for any verbal comments, and then I will reference the collaborative notes throughout this part of the discussion. And as a reminder, please state your name when you are speaking. And we also want to make sure that you all know that we do have Sikkai leadership in the room. So this is your opportunity to directly speak and interact with those who are the decision makers of our community. Yes, Finda?
Sure. For this particular section, I just also wanted to reiterate that Sikkai is a largely volunteer-based organization. And so I want to encourage everyone to feel empowered. We're all a part of this community that has a responsibility to improve upon it, to support Sikkai and thinking of ways in which we have done to further create policies and recommendations that can be used within Sikkai and across Sikkai as they are responsible for conferences, awards, and beyond.
Thank you. As we wait for those who want to participate verbally, I'm going to read off some of the highlighted parts of our collaborative notes. So within what Sikkai can do to promote racial equity in relation to conferences, there has been feedback on greater emphasis on intersectional studies and methodologies. This includes recognition of the greater time and effort and cost required for sampling, analysis, and design. Create safe spaces for engagement and conversation, like these equity talks. Normalize a greater diversity of methodological approaches. Hire translators for everything taking place in conferences. Invite local vendors to conferences and consider who is providing the food. Is there an equitable representation of women and ethnically minority-owned businesses? Who's benefited locally? Who might be disadvantaged from our presence? Especially students who experience some form of marginalization. Make digital libraries available to all, especially underrepresented minorities. Create tracks that publish on WhatsApp and Facebook so that we can reach those who only have access to these tools. Constantly run people through workshops that discuss reviewing for ACM and funding agencies such as the National Science Foundation. Develop equitable and transparent processes for awards development and awardee selection that can be supported for especially early career Sikkai community members in support of more diverse pipelines to the highest echelons of the community. Again, we will be monitoring those in the Zoom room here. If you'd like to share an idea or reflection of what we just shared from the collaborative notes, please raise your hand using the Zoom reaction. Or if you are having difficulty with the reactions, please feel free to indicate that in the chat. All right, we have a raised hand from Deborah.
Hello. So it's me again, Deborah Leal. I didn't present myself. I'm from Brazil, but I'm doing my PhD in Siegen, Germany. I just want to ask if maybe I couldn't follow like properly, but I miss to promote racial equity in conferences, right? It's not because my question is it equity to the area? Are we focusing only on conferences? Because we talk about policies, and I'm sorry, maybe it's coming, right? Does anyone understand my question?
Yeah, so I can help support in answering it. And yeah, thank you for the question. And then yeah, I'll just answer it. So Sikkai manages and oversees, and this will be I think this is also great for a lot of people to know, they manage and oversee various conferences across ACM, I think Kai being the largest. They also, and also the Sikkai Executive Board, please correct me if I'm wrong. They also manage awards. So there's different awards that can be given, travel awards, also various research and recognition awards. In addition to managing, there's we have our media, they have a Medium or blog that is used, an interaction magazine. So it's a overarching organization, and conferences is just one aspect of it. And so when we ask for recommendations for policy and changes, we recognize that they're an overarching board. Each conference has their own general chairs and technical program chairs who may or may not be in this room today. But Sikkai does play a large role in the management of all of those conferences. So I hope that answers your questions. And if you or anyone has any additional recommendations or policies across the board, we welcome them here.
Thank you. All right, we're now going to move on to additional questions and feedback left on in the collaborative notes document. Again, the link is on the slide, and we've also pasted it in our Zoom chat. So another question is, what can people do to personally promote racial equity? Some highlighted examples in the collaborative notes doc include: cite Black scholars in your syllabus and readings and acknowledge the contribution of their work. Cite African, Asian, Latin, Arab scholars too. Recognize that the more marginalized the person, the greater amplification of voice is required. And recognize our role in racialized systems connected to the HCI community. We have about 10 minutes left for this part of the chat. We see a raised hand, Marisol.
Yes, I was just thinking about what Deborah, it's not only what she just said, but in general conversations that I've had with her and with other scholars about citations in general. And so one thing that, and Deborah, I'm hoping I'm not saying something that you wouldn't want to share. I thought it was something that you think in general, but it's something that she brought up when we're talking about increasing citation numbers for people with different race, ethnicities, cultural backgrounds. Are we talking about continuing the same? It's just changing a little bit the game, maybe not even changing the game, just changing the output of the game, but continuing with the same game. Are we talking about just promoting the same problems, but being more inclusive in the way we promote them? Or so that question, I don't know what people think. I keep thinking about that when we're talking about citing more other people. Is it citing because we want to add representation, or because we appreciate the knowledge, or because we want to change parts of the system? What is it? Yeah.
Would anyone like to respond or have any reflections to what Marisol said?
Deborah,
Okay.
Deborah.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with Marisol. I just, because I'm still confused about my question. It's because if we do not have indigenous, Black people, whatever, in the universities, how can we say that we're gonna promote them to the conference? I think it's a step before. I don't understand how can we make them to come to conferences or to get fund if they are not even joining a PhD. That's how I feel. In Brazil, we have been trying to get names and people who are doing, indigenous doing PhD. It's so rare to find. And what can we do to support those who want to be in the academy? And also there are some examples of people like hospitals being built in the Amazon rainforest, where you have knowledge of indigenous and knowledge, Western knowledge combined. So I think the combination, the support, you know, like we don't have, because my point is, like I read something somewhere, I don't remember where, like, why do we speak English? We speak English, the language of the colonizer, because we want them to listen to us. It's not because I want to be involved. It's like we want to be heard. So how can we maybe, yeah, just maybe I'm complicating more, Marisol, sorry, but I just trying to understand the other step, but maybe it's coming. So but maybe I cannot, for this one, I cannot contribute so much.
Yeah, we appreciate that perspective, Deborah. We're entering the last 5 minutes for this part of the conversation, so I'm going to verbalize some of the additional feedback that was left on our collaborative notes document. We had feedback, there was a question that was posed. What are the racialized systems connected to our community and our roles in them? And then there was another comment on leaders, mentors should strive to educate themselves about race on a continual basis and create safe, brave spaces in which racial equity can be discussed within their realms of influence, like committees or chapters. When serving on tenure and review committees, stress the importance of equity, diversity, service, leadership work, and that it should be considered a major contribution because this work is often done by BIPOC, by our Black, Indigenous, people of color. And there's another question highlighted here. How is promoting racial equity different from promoting equity? All right, do we have any reflections or comments from what I just verbalized from the collaborative notes doc? All right, we'll have first Vinoba and then Finda.
Vinoba Vinagamuthi, she, her. This is, I guess, an additional thought, perhaps. So I take the point Deborah was making about there being a pipeline. I guess that's what we would call it, a pipeline issue that, you know, we don't have enough racial diversity coming into organizations in the UK or the USA. And so getting, getting a Sri Lankan scholar from, and I'm just using Sri Lankan just because my heritage happens to be in Sri Lankan, right? And I grew up in Nigeria, so I'll use Nigerian universities. But, finding a Sri Lankan scholar from the UK, it's tough. However, Sri Lanka has universities, Nigeria has universities. They have PhD students, they have scholars. Presumably, they do computer science work over there as well. So is there something Sikkai can do, for instance, working with chapters, working with the communities there? How can we reach out and get people from there perhaps involved in bringing knowledge to us over here? And maybe over time, that pipeline issue gets inspiration and you get some, you have parallel work happening there as well. But I do wonder if we should just look further afield, and how can Sikkai raise people, raise the awareness of these people who are very difficult to find even on Google, right? Just because of the way metadata and things like that works. And also what are the ways we can work together and sort of also value the type of work they're doing in the very different conditions that they're doing it under.
Thank you for sharing that. For the sake of time, we'll move to Finda and then Kale.
Cool. So there were two things I wanted to comment. So in terms of the comment by Deborah, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. This is Ihudiya Finda Williams, by the way. I agree. I hope a big takeaway. So we do have recommendations for the broader policy of Sikkai, but we do have questions asking about personal actions and community actions. And so one thing I do hope everyone takes away who is passionate about this is to continue to act and to use their own realm of influence or power to create a more equitable and just world. going along that, there was a question of how is promoting racial equity different from promoting equity? That's a great question. And so I'll just answer in that promoting racial equity is promoting equity, but there are different frames and lenses that we can use to address issues and challenges of equity. And so I thank Sikkai for doing an equity talk on disability. I thank Sikkai for doing an equity talk on gender. And I thank Sikkai for this talk that specifically focuses on race and ethnicity. And it's not to say that one is important than the other. We all sit in different intersectional places in our lives, but sometimes it takes us focusing on just one. I'm sure a lot of us can't multitask that well, but sometimes it helps focusing on just one for us to unpack the injustices that are going on with it. And on that, I do thank the question, but I also want to recenter it on the core question of this discussion of what are recommendations for policy changes as it relates to race and Sikkai. And I do hope that Sikkai does provide more educational opportunities for all of us to learn and grow and have these great conversations.
And then Kale, I know that you've raised your hand.
Yeah, but why don't Melissa, you can take over for me. And
that's great.
Marisol.
Melissa?
Yeah, so I think I posted that question, but I think it was read differently than I intended. So I didn't mean to say that like, oh, we promote equity, we're automatically promoting racial equity, but rather like the sort of technical, because a lot of the recommendations that we see are same recommendations we're seeing across the board for all the equity talks, right? Like, Gary Marsden Fund, Development Fund, whatever. But like, I want to dive into like what is the knowledge that we can, specific knowledge that we're taking from our experiences of race, and how does that influence how we look at equity differently or additionally beyond what's there? Does that help to clarify that question?
Yes, thank you. And again, for those who are just joining us, we'll also have an off-the-record component to this equity talk coming up shortly. Before we head into that, I know that Marisol raised her hand.
Yes, again, and just thinking and reflect, I don't think there's like, so one thing that strikes me is the notion that if we implement some changes, then greater equity will take place. But we sometimes think of that change. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just like thinking out loud. We think of that change in terms of where we want to go to, like what is the end goal? The end goal is to increase participation. It seems to be, I'm not saying that should be the end goal, but that seems to be the end goal that we're talking about. Increased participation of more people of different backgrounds, colors, ethnicities, races. But why are we assuming that that is an end goal? Why aren't we? I think this goes, and maybe I'm bringing Deborah too much, but this goes back to what she was saying, like, let's think about the history of why we are where we are at right now. And why are we thinking of continuing through the same path or aiming at the same goals and just changing how many more people participate? Then going back, like, how can we think about policy changes at a Sikkai level exactly when there's so many problems behind, not even behind, but like in other levels that are not allowing for people to have freedom to choose? And I think that to me is the most important part, is the freedom to choose. Maybe people don't want to go Sikkai, they don't want to be in HCI, they don't want to, but they don't have enough freedom to choose because of all these issues of inequities that we've talked about. It doesn't bring any policy changes into my mind, but I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Marisol. All right, we're nearly out of time for this session, so I'm just going to read off the new highlighted parts of the collaborative notes document before I transition off to our next section. So additional comments that were left since we've read off include, if there's a pipeline issue in the USA, UK, or EU, can we bring inspiration from elsewhere, and how do we build those bridges? Related to that comment about 10-year committees, perhaps Sikkai can provide resources such as citations or arguments that can be used to support advocacy within these academic and also industry promotional processes. We've also seen new comments about awards. So if we believe that subcommittees lack diversity, then consider alternatives to the award process. Can we seek input from the larger community? There was a response to that when someone said, I think it's almost the opposite. People often don't respond to broadcast calls when they will respond one-to-one. But unfortunately, one-to-one outreaches have a tendency to be less representative because we as committee members leverage our personal networks. All right, and with that, we are out of time for this part of the equity talk. We're now going to go to transition to our off the record section